Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Welcome to episode 79 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Today is part 1 of a 2-part series on endometriosis, and we have the privilege of meeting Kimberly Castello, a certified yoga therapist who at the age of 27 was dealing with extreme fatigue, bladder issues, and persistent pelvic pain. Kimberly was so fatigued, she went to a yoga class and couldn't raise her arms overhead. Her diagnosis wasn't an easy and straight path, though. Along the way, someone asked her, "How can you be so sick? You do yoga." Kimberly shares how she was diagnosed with endometriosis and how, through that, she was dealing with depression, grief, and isolation. She talks about how her yoga helped her once she learned what yoga was most helpful. She also shares the poses and yoga that she is using and still working on. All of our show notes you can find at theconnectedyogateacher.com/79. So if we refer to something, then you will find it in the show notes. Returning listeners, thank you for being here each and every week. If you are new, welcome. My name is Shannon Crow. I'm a mother of 3, a yoga teacher, and a consultant for yoga teachers. I get how isolating it can feel as a yoga teacher and as an entrepreneur. We have so much to learn as yoga teachers, and it can be so overwhelming. There's yoga philosophy, the poses, the sequences, breath practices, language, how we cue things. On top of all of this is how to run a business, as well as learning about the specific conditions that our yoga students may be dealing with. This is why I love sharing episodes like this one today, where we hear from a yoga teacher who is dealing with a specific health issue, in this case, endometriosis. The Connected Yoga Teacher podcast was created for you, the yoga teacher entrepreneur. Every week, we are here between the classes, workshops, and trainings that you are teaching or attending so that you can connect to information, ideas, and a supportive community of other yoga teachers. Speaking of community, if you are not already a member of the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group, come and join us. Visit theconnectedyogateacher.com and look for the join button on our homepage or follow the links in our show notes. In that Facebook group, we have yoga teachers who are right now in their very first yoga teacher training, all the way to teachers who have been sharing yoga for over 20 years. This week, we had some great threads of discussion. Rebecca talked about doing a yoga photo shoot and was asking for some help. Stephanie is wanting to do a really simple logo for her yoga business and reaching out to ask others how they did that. I shared my favorite new productivity tool. Let me tell you about it. It keeps me from being distracted on Facebook. It is a Google Chrome add-on, and it's called News Feed Eradicator. So instead of seeing my news feed on my computer, I just see a little quote. And then that allows me to get in there on Facebook, be in the group, do the things that I need to do with my pages, and not get caught up in cute cat videos and fun photos from friends. And so I leave that for my time on my phone when I have some time when I'm sitting and waiting and scrolling. Also in the Facebook group, Julie asked about how to market her yoga retreat on Facebook. And Joyce asked to hear from our teachers who are teaching cat, goat, dog, and rabbit yoga to share what they love about it, what the draw is for people, and to explain it to her. Claire also asked a great question about how to know which Facebook friend requests to accept. So there's such great discussion in there. Come and join us. We would love to have you there. Thanks to everyone who is commenting, sharing, and asking questions in our Facebook group. Way back in March of this year, I had posted a question in the group just looking to connect to a yoga teacher who was either using yoga to help with endometriosis or working with students who have endometriosis. So huge shout out of thanks to Angela for connecting me to Kimberly. Next week, we hear from Dustien, who I also connected with through that thread. So it's amazing how it came together. Also, thanks to everyone who voted. I wasn't sure if I should do back-to-back episodes, one huge long episode, or have time between these two endometriosis episodes. And the votes were mainly for back-to-back, so that's what's happening. It's nice to hear from you and hear what it is that you would like for the podcast. Before we dive in and meet Kimberly, let's hear from Michaela over at Schedulicity.
Hello, connected yoga teachers. This is Michaela with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Schedulicity is an amazing accounting tool. Your dashboard shows your weekly estimated revenue, the number of bookings you have, and the average revenue per booking. Enabling the payment add-on makes things even easier. Once you're connected to Stripe or Square, all your transactions will be listed on your payment screen, and you can select a date range, search by tender type or confirmation number, and export that information to an Excel document. With your schedule and your money this organized, you might have time to tackle something even tougher, like that weird junk drawer or your kid's closet.
Thank you, Michaela, and to the entire team of rock stars over at Schedulicity. So let's get into today's topic. First of all, endometriosis is defined as an inflammatory condition. People with endo, that's another name for endometriosis, experience a growth of endometrial-like tissue outside of their uterus. It's associated with pelvic pain and infertility. Endometriosis affects an estimated 176 million women of reproductive age worldwide. And I've even heard from yoga teachers working with women who are beyond reproductive age as well. I don't know a lot about that. I'm really curious to hear more, but I think that we're just starting to learn more about endo, and interviews like today with Kimberly and next week with Dustien. I'm very excited to bring that to you so that you can get a grasp and hear what that story is really like for someone who's living with it or working with people who are. Kimberly Castello is a certified yoga therapist who completed her clinical internship with the Mann Venice Family Clinic in Los Angeles, California. Kimberly specializes in developing chronic pain management programs for individuals, hospitals, and clinics. Having experienced the benefits of yoga therapy firsthand after being diagnosed with a painful illness, Kimberly became interested in extending her practice to help support others who are living with chronic pain, injury, and illness. Kimberly offers private yoga therapy programs, teaches weekly therapeutic yoga classes, and leads the wellness program for the Cleveland Clinic Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health. She has trained extensively in therapeutic, restorative, and vinyasa yoga. Let's dive in and meet Kimberly. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Kimberly. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time out to chat with me today.
Tell us what your yoga journey has been like. What got you even started with yoga?
Oh, that's such a great question. I started when, I want to say I was in maybe my first year in college. So I guess I was 18, 19 years old. And a friend had recommended that I go to some yoga classes because I had always been dancing growing up. And stretching was, something that I loved. So she thought it would be a great thing for me. And I went to a class. And I loved it from the moment I stepped onto the mat. It was just the most familiar thing I had ever experienced, if that makes sense. And I instantly, my type A little personality instantly took me to a teacher training. And it's not the typical journey for most of us yoga teachers out there, but I just knew it's something I wanted to learn more about. And I went right into it probably within the first few months of practicing. And I started teaching very soon after. And I continued to train, and I continued to crave more education about yoga. And I started as a power yoga teacher, and I loved it. It fit my personality perfectly, so it seemed at the time. And I'd say about, it was 2007, and I was maybe 10 years into teaching, and I was teaching a class one day, and I had trouble lifting my arms up above my head on an inhalation, just from mountain pose, just extending my arms up. I felt like there was just weights on my arms, just invisible weights that no one could see, and I was having trouble just lifting my arms up and bringing my arms back down. And I thought, that's strange and slightly uncomfortable. And I then went into a forward bend, and I felt really dizzy. And I'd been, fit, healthy. I was young. I was in my 20s, mid-20s at the time, and never really been sick. So I really didn't know what to do with that information. And I went an hour later and taught another class, of course, because that's the kind of person that I am. I push through, and even if I'm not feeling good, I just keep going. And I ended up going and searching for some answers. I went from doctor to doctor to doctor, and they just, I don't know, nobody had any answers. They just said I was getting older. I was probably 27, I think, at the time. And I just turned 40 a couple weeks ago, by the way, so I think that's hilarious that 27 was looked at as old.
Getting up there, 27.
Yeah, I was pushing it. So I'm just not somebody that takes no for an answer, so I just kept pushing and kept looking for answers, and there was just nothing out there. I was going in describing these symptoms of fatigue beyond anything I could explain. And just to give you a little understanding of where I was coming from, I have an accounting degree. That was the degree I was focusing on when I was studying at UNLV in Las Vegas. And I was, of course, learning and growing as a yoga teacher at the same time. So I was working like 40 hours a week and teaching probably 5 or 6 classes of yoga a week with no problem, and working out on top of that, just doing the usual gym stuff. So for me, I had no idea what fatigue really was. It just kind of knocked me over. So when I was going to these doctors and I'm saying, I'm telling you I'm tired and I'm not a whiny person, I'm not a lazy person, and there was just no insight into what was going on. And I finally had somebody do some tests to look for mono. And they of course, within, a day came back and said, oh my gosh, you have mono. Nobody ever thought, 5 doctors later, nobody thought to test for it.
Wow.
So they, of course, it was shocking because it seemed like such a simple thing. Yeah. And it really came at the urging of my mother, actually. She started going with me to all these doctor's appointments, kind of rallying for me, saying, this is my child. She's not a lazy child. She's more tired than I've ever been in my entire life, and there's something wrong with her. So, we need to look for answers. So they came back, put me on some prenatal vitamins, and just told me to rest. And I thought, okay, that's great. I have to work.
Right.
And I teach classes, and what would you like me to do? I can't just take time off. That's not who I am. That's not in the cards for Kimberly. So I ended up having to do that. And I took several weeks off and rested and put teaching on hold, which I think was one of the hardest things for me, not to even have a practice of any kind. And in truth, I wasn't even having a practice for myself. I was busy just teaching yoga because that's what I did. And that's who I was in my mind. So I don't think I'd even found a personal practice at that point, which is really awful to say, especially speaking to all of you yoga teachers right now, when we know that's what we really need to be doing if we even want to be helping others. So it's kind of interesting how that happened.
But I appreciate your honesty in that. I feel like that is the one thing I hear from yoga teachers over and over again, is that they lose their personal practice once they become a yoga teacher.
Yeah. And that's where self-care comes in for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. So I think it's good to know I'm not alone. And I bet you there's some type A's out there with me too that are listening right now. So
yes.
That know what I'm saying.
Yep.
Right? That we identify as yoga teachers. That's who we are. And we take pride in that. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's such a great, beautiful quality. But I think if it's directed correctly, we can continue to take care of ourselves. And I'd say that's the big lesson here for me. And so from there, honestly, it just, I'll kind of briefly take us there because I can talk about it, especially when I'm passionate about something. But what we ended up finding out, I went to a doctor and she realized that I had endometriosis and didn't believe it was connected to the mono. It actually is. And I'll kind of touch on that briefly in a moment, if you don't mind, because I think it's really important here.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I had no idea. It was shocking. So I ended up going to a general OBGYN, and I think she did the best that she could with the tools that she had, honestly. They're not schooled on endometriosis in their education as doctors. It's not something that they're taught a lot about. I think they just, learn that it's just bad cramps, you have bad cycles, and, we just kind of need to live with it, which is sort of what women hear.
Mm-hmm.
And oddly, I was going to all female doctors, and they kind of were like, suck it up. It's just you're female. This is how it is. So I thought, okay, how would I know any different if no one ever gave me any other information? So I have to wonder what other women are feeling out there. And that's a little where my journey took me. Who is giving this information to us? Who is telling us that this isn't normal? You aren't supposed to be suffering day in and day out. And you're not supposed to be living with this kind of fatigue, that there really is a true imbalance in your hormones if this is what you're going through. So it turns out I went through a surgery. They did a laser surgery and very much on the surface removed some of the endometriosis that they could. It was everywhere. It was everywhere. It was in my bowel, my bladder, fallopian, uterus. It was just my left quadricep. It was the craziest thing ever. So it was everywhere, and they wanted to actually put me into early menopause. I was 28 at this time.
Wow.
And it was a temporary medicine. It was called Lupron, which
it's very common.
Further research, very common, right? And I know they're doing the best that they can. We know with Western medicine, they do the best that they can. But I know the intentions are good, but I just knew it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. And I did not want to go through temporary menopause and come out of it and it come back full blown anyway. And I just knew it wasn't the right thing. So upon further research, found a wonderful specialist in San Jose and ended up going to see him about a year and a half later, who then let me know that the mono came from the endometriosis. Because my immune system was weak from the endometriosis, I easily got mono. And it stayed in my system for a solid 2 years. And it actually then developed into chronic fatigue syndrome. And there's no way to explain. The chronic fatigue is the worst symptom for me. I have learned to manage it. But for me, it just knocked me over because I was a go, go, go kind of a person. And I know in a lot of what I've learned in my yoga therapy training at Loyola Marymount is that type A's are more than likely to end up with an autoimmune disease, and endometriosis falls right in that category. Despite what a lot of people believe, I live with it. I can tell you it's an autoimmune disease.
Right.
It's systemic. It affects every aspect of my life. My life was managed around endometriosis for the last 11 or 12 years until I started to realize it was controlling my life and I had to do something different.
So for our listeners who have no idea what endometriosis is, what is kind of the textbook? Yeah. How do you define that for someone who doesn't know what it is?
Sure, great question. Simply said, endometriosis is where tissue develops on outside of your uterus that is supposed to really shed with our cycles. And for those with endometriosis, it's actually not limited to the uterus. It's just explained that way. It can attach to any of your organs. And it's the outside of the organs that it's attaching to. But they tend to remove it, a laser surgery. They like to remove it off of the surface, but it's embedded in your tissues, unfortunately, which is why it keeps growing. And it actually grows from estrogen. So even if you have removed the female organs, it can still grow. It's what you drink. It's what you eat. It's the stress in your life. It's pretty much anything and everything. It's environmental factors. So it's estrogen based, which is why, we can manage it in a lot of ways with our foods. And I found that has helped me a lot. Lifestyle changes, which of course came from yoga for me, that awareness that we all get when we practice yoga. But it causes a lot of symptoms beyond what we're seeing textbook wise, which is bad cramps, bad cycles. That's the surface of it. That's I think, an issue that most women can connect to if they've had a bad period, unfortunately. But this goes so beyond it because it's a daily struggle. It could be daily fatigue. It can be daily nausea. It can be, of course, the monthly cycle, but it's irregular cycles as well, where they could be very heavy to the point that they're debilitating, that you can't even get out of bed and you can't even leave your house. So
Right.
And that's just like scratching the surface right there, barely scratching the surface. I'm giving bullet points right now at this point.
And you said that when you were seeing these medical professionals that people aren't really trained, people don't really know, and then you were getting this attitude of like, just suck it up, be more active, or yeah, we all have cycles, and yeah, it's not the nicest thing. But you're saying it's so much beyond that, and yet the education isn't there.
Yeah, the education isn't there. And I mean, that was really heartbreaking to hear. I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yes.
We have a long ways to go. But I would say I worked with Dr. Andrew Cook, and he's at the Vital Health Institute in San Jose. And he has an entire practice just specializing in women's health. And I'm so grateful for people like this, because if you don't have the specialists who are looking, who are studying, who are constantly looking for more information based on what their patients are telling them, and they're listening to their patients, they're verbally hearing their patients, and they're watching their symptoms, their physical symptoms. That's, I think, what puts the picture together. But that is one of the things that I've heard from the specialists, which is there isn't a lot of education about this. It's not a focus. It's not a big illness that anybody really thinks much about in school. So I'm hoping that that's changing, and I think that we have these wonderful specialists that are out there that are trying to pave the way to find more paths to bring that knowledge forward, so that people realize that this is actually a big illness, and there's a lot of women suffering from it that aren't even diagnosed, that don't even know they're dealing with it. We just go to our, OBGYNs, and we're like, oh, it's a period, get on some birth control, here you go, and you're on your way. Because that's what happened to me. When I look back, honestly, 10 years prior to my diagnosis, I was 18 years old. I had a cycle for 30 straight days. And
Wow.
I went to the doctor at the urging of my mother, because she said, this isn't normal. We need to go do something. And I, of course, was scared. I was 18. I didn't even know, what was happening. And they did an ultrasound, said I had some cysts. They said, hey, no big deal. Everybody gets cysts. Here's some birth control, and sent me on my way. That was my first visit, by the way, with a gynecologist. And I was just told this is normal. So I left with like some ibuprofen and birth control, which scared me to death because I had no idea what that meant for me. I just didn't know what that journey was going to look like. And I will admit, it gave me 4-day cycles. And so I went about for the next 10 years thinking this was great. And I had a few bad days a month, but I pushed through it because they told me it was normal. And I'm a female, and I need to not complain. So I went about my way. And 10 years later, I just had all these underlying symptoms. And it wasn't until I just I couldn't stand for, I would take a walk with my dog, to put it in perspective, and come back and need to sleep for a week.
Wow.
And that just,
Yeah, and that's beyond that. That isn't normal at all in terms of I'm tired now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I can
Exactly.
see, like, listening to different people with I'm fascinated that it is connected to chronic fatigue, because that's another one that I feel, that's another whole thing that is misunderstood.
Yes.
If someone is saying they have chronic fatigue, I know there is a general reaction right away, like, yeah, life's busy, we're all busy, yep, we're all tired kind of thing. But this is well beyond that. I've heard some people describe endometriosis as like this kind of a formation of cement in the abdomen. Would you say that is what it feels like?
Yeah, I would say that's a good way to, I haven't heard that description, so thank you for offering that. That's a good way to describe it. I mean, I think a way I can describe it would be similar. Cement is such a great word to use, a great description, because one of the ways my doctor described it, and it hit the nail on the head, and I thought, thank you for hearing me. I felt validated for the first time. He said it was like an anchor. When you anchor a boat and it's attached to you and you just can't disconnect from it, and it's dragging you through life. And so cement, what an interesting word, because that is so connected to that feeling that I have. I mean, you could feel stabbing pains from the inside out, like something is trying to push out of you.
Mm-hmm.
I could tell you it's been described as the pain that you get is like contractions. I can time them. And I could tell you they'll come every 45 seconds to a minute, like a contraction. I have not delivered a baby, so I don't like to take that away from females out there that have been through that experience. But I know that I've talked firsthand with females that have endometriosis and have had children. And they said having children was a piece of cake.
Right.
Piece of cake.
So it's a wave of pain that comes.
Yes, it's a wave of pain. It can be constant. It can come and go. It can flow in and out. It can come at certain times of the month, or it can stay with you on a daily basis. It's different for every female. I can say that. So when you get a group of females together talking about it, it's very helpful, because I think it teaches us that, one, we're not alone. It validates how we're feeling. And also you realize, wow, there's so many different ways to receive this illness. There's so many different symptoms that come up. Not everybody started in the same way. Not everybody's continues in the same way. And that helps you recognize that maybe that's why it's so complicated for them to get their hands around. And if they're not looking for it and they're not willing to listen to what you say, and they're just doing the typical, you're in and out at a doctor's office, you wait for an hour to get in to see your doctor, and then they give you 5 minutes, they get you in and out with your pap smear, and then they're like, see you next year. And they don't really want to listen to your symptoms. No wonder they can't tackle it,
Mm-hmm.
So unless they go in and they have studied this illness and that's all that they do, and then you have different females coming in with these different symptoms, maybe they're not putting it together that there's so many symptoms out there that it surfaces different. I had bladder issues for a long time that nobody could understand. And it wasn't until I got to the fatigue thing that people started listening to me a little bit more. But that took 5 doctors, because it was like, well, you're just tired. Everybody's tired. You're working hard.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's hard to connect these things when we're not willing to be open to listening to how we can connect them, if that makes sense, from a Western medicine perspective.
Yeah. And then to get to this point where you were so exhausted that lifting your arms up was beyond what you could physically do. That's something.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody can connect with that. If you said to somebody, if you couldn't lift your arms, how would you feel? I think that makes people kind of think, oh, what would that feel like for me? I've gotten people's attention, I think, when I've said that.
Well, I know after I had my second baby, I needed a blood transfusion and I couldn't lift my arms. And it was only because my body was so depleted, needed something else. So I can't imagine then getting to I knew why, everyone knew why, but getting to the, you're teaching a class. That would be very scary.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is one person said to me, how could you be getting sick? You do yoga. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
What a wonderful question.
Like it's the cure-all.
It's the cure-all, isn't it? I mean, it's the same thing. I'll be honest. I gained probably 47 pounds throughout the course of this as well. And I'm going to tell you the truth, that was the hardest thing for me.
Right.
I had to recognize that everything else would come back in balance when I started taking care of myself, instead of just getting up and saying, look, the weight's going up on the scale, and look what you look like when you look in the mirror. I didn't even know myself anymore. I had lost touch with myself in so many ways, but all I could see was the weight I had gained. Because I was lucky, I'd been thin. I didn't have to work to be thin. I was just a naturally kind of a skinny, bony child. And the weight came out of nowhere, but it was inflammation. It was stress. It was illness. It was grieving for, the loss of myself, the person that I thought I was supposed to be, the path I thought I was supposed to take, that energetic girl that, people always saw going, the type A, straight A student that didn't know how to fail, and failing was absolutely unacceptable in my mind. So it's kind of interesting that I ended up getting knocked over by this disease. And I think when I was able to get past that I was living with an illness, that basically my doctor said, look, you're going to manage this for the rest of your life. It's systemic. It's going to affect everything that you do, and you're going to have to work 10 times harder than the average person works to do the simplest things. The grief from that alone can take you down, to be quite honest. And I want people to know that other people feel this way, and I wish people would share and talk about this, because I felt so isolated, even with a wonderful support system from my family and friends. I didn't know how to get out of bed some days, and I didn't even want to get out of bed. There was a point in my life where I didn't want to get up because I thought, why? I'm sick. I have nothing to offer. Where do I go from here?
Wow, that is something. I'm so glad that you shared that with us, like a glimpse of what that looks like. Obviously, we can't all understand it, but hearing you talk about that and the grief, I think really offers a whole new perspective. And that news that your doctor told you, like, you are going to have this for the rest of your life, and it's going to impact you in this way. So how are you dealing with that now? What is helping? What doesn't help?
Oh, that's such a great question. Where do I start on that one? I would say I had a moment where I realized I was focusing on everything that I couldn't do anymore. I was focusing on the things that I couldn't eat instead of the things that I could eat that would help nourish my body. And I wasn't an unhealthy eater, but just to give a little insight, because the food is really important for endometriosis, because it can cause a lot of inflammatory issues, which we know as, yoga teachers, we're always looking at our lifestyle changes and our habits. And hearing from my doctor that like gluten and dairy and things like that were inflammatory to my body, when I started focusing on what I could do instead of all these limitations I was just had in front of me, all the physical limitations, all the food limitations, all the energetic limitations that I had, when I got to the point where I was tired of living that way, being angry at what I felt had been stolen from me, being sad, being, feeling down and depressed. And I think when I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore, and I needed to take steps to focus on what I could do. And I ended up actually connecting with someone that helped me kind of sort through all those things and take a look at myself and realize that I had to just start taking care of me and sort of start where I was, which is sort of, I feel like my theme every day. I get up and I say this to my students every week, but when I started doing this for myself, I saw a shift. Start where you are.
Right.
And I had to sit up and say, this is where I am right now. Do I want to stay here and feel like the illness is controlling me? And oddly, I have some control issues. Let's just be honest. Like, I have control issues. I really do. And I didn't connect all of it. It's such an amazing thing when you have this, it's like this, we say this all the time, this aha moment that you have. And it helped me to realize that, my expectations for myself, not anybody else's expectations, but Kimberly's expectations of where I was supposed to be in my life in that moment. And I work on this every day. I'm just going to be honest. This is a daily yoga practice for me. It's not the asana like it isn't for most of us at this point in our practice. I had to, develop a personal practice, which became restorative for me. And I couldn't go into a practice like that until I was too sick to do power vinyasa. And it wasn't about the sequencing and the pushing and the chaturangas and the beautiful poses that made you feel, strong. And it was a little bit of ego probably, but I didn't even know it was ego at the time. And I got into practicing with Judith Hanson-Lassiter, and who is just so amazing and shifted my entire world. And I started practicing restorative, and the benefits were just amazing. I think some people don't know how to rest until they're so tired that they have to rest, because we look at it like a practice that nothing's happening, when actually everything is happening in that moment. We're learning to slow down. We're learning to focus on the breath. We're learning to be quiet so we can find out how we're really feeling in our lives. And I didn't know how to do that up until that point. I just got up to get things done in life, to be quite honest. I got up to accomplish things,
How did you, I heard you say that you got to this point where you had to rest.
Yeah.
If someone is, say someone is dealing with endometriosis or another thing in their life where they're really to the point of an illness or chronic fatigue or feeling run down, but yet, every message in society, even the messages that you were getting when you were going for health care, is like, suck it up, keep going forward, keep moving forward. Is there anything that you would say to people so that you could give them some insight into like how important restorative, the difference it can make?
Yeah. One thing I've done is I have shared my story. I've shared it a lot as I've come into a lot of private clients and just my students that are coming in that are struggling and they're tired. And it felt like such a vulnerable thing. And I'm a very open, emotionally driven person, but it was such a vulnerable thing to share with people because I didn't know how people were going to look at me and what they were going to say. Because if you say something like, I've been living with this illness, I have chronic fatigue, they look at you like you're crazy, first of all, because I look perfectly healthy to people.
Right.
But that comes from putting on this exterior, trying to brave through things and wanting people to believe that you're doing good, and the need to please, which those are a whole other set of qualities from an emotional standpoint we could talk about, from the yoga perspective of why I got to where I was and why a lot of us get to where we are, because we're trying to do these outward things, these things on the surface that are deeply affecting what's going on inside, but we're not taking the time to look inward. So I feel like when I have opened up and shared my story, I feel like I connect with people and they go, oh. And I've also said, how's it working for you? Like, how do you feel? Like,
is that working out? Right.
And that's honestly what was said to me. How's this working for you, Kimberly? You don't feel good. So if what you're doing and you're doing the same thing over and over hasn't worked for you, would you be willing, as Judith would say to me, would you be willing to look at exploring something else if I told you that it would allow you to feel better and to gain a sense of control of your life, but in a healthy way? I use that word control a lot, and I'm trying to get to a place in my life where the word control has a healthy connotation to it, if that makes sense.
That's amazing.
Not so much attaching to controlling the outcome, which I'm really good at, by the way, but more so trying to let go of what the outcome needed to be. And can you revise the picture you had in your head? And I'm honest with people, I'm doing this every single day, which is probably why I can speak so easily from my heart in my classes to my students.
Right.
And I'm sharing my journey honestly through my words, and it comes out. And I think that's why it's connecting for people. It's happened for me working with multiple sclerosis patients in the last several months. They felt validated, like somebody could understand them when I spoke about the fatigue and the picture they had in their head of what their life was supposed to look like and what a yoga practice was supposed to look like. And then when you offer them ways that it can feel great but look different, I think people are willing to pause, but I think they have to be ready. And we also have to give people space to get there. I needed space. People had to hold space for me for quite a while in my life, I have to say. Friends and family both. They had to hold space for me until I was ready to look at myself and say, is pushing through everything really working out for me? You know, can I look at my life differently and be willing to, again, just start where I am? And what does that look like? And what would that feel like? And instead of it being like, this is defeat, I failed, because that's how it looked in my mind. I had completely failed. And I'm the only one that created the path I was supposed to go down. Nobody knew it but me. I mean, think about it. It's kind of like when you're a new yoga teacher and you go into a class and you have a sequence in your head and you go in and you go to teach this and you walk out and you go, ooh, I missed triangle pose. I really wanted to do triangle pose. And then you leave and you think, nobody knew that but me, right?
Meanwhile,
really
you're beating yourself up over it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I found those qualities in yoga, in my practice, where I was able to be patient with myself. And I'm so patient with my students, I thought, why can't I be this patient with myself? I'm not yelling at them for, not feeling good in triangle pose. Why am I beating myself up? So how can we learn to transfer that kindness that we can give to others and put it back to ourselves? And I think we miss that. I think we miss it every day of our lives because we're just trying to push through and accomplish and walk a path that we have in our head for ourselves. And unfortunately, that's sometimes what contributes to these kinds of illnesses. It sure as heck doesn't help. I guess that's the best way to say it. I don't think I just got sick because I was a type A person. And I like to make that clear to people that they don't feel like they made themselves sick, because I honestly felt that way for a while. I thought, I made myself sick. I'm being punished, for being a hardworking person and pushing too hard and holding on too tight in life. And then I realized, no, that's not what yoga philosophy is telling us. It's telling us we have the tools already inside us. We just have to be willing to pause and look at those tools and maybe just explore a new vision for ourselves. And what if it looks even better than the first vision that we had in our head? Like, how amazing would that be? Right?
Right. Wow, that is so much insight. I really appreciate the detail of that and how it felt. And also that you said there was this holding space that your friends and family had to do, that you just had to get through it. And like you said, it was a real process of grief and letting go and coming to this kindness to yourself. Is there anything that if someone's sort of at the beginning of that journey, was there any practice that you did do in the past that really helped or that you do now?
Yeah, I would say I always start everybody with legs on the chair just to breathe. And I find that that's the simplest thing for pretty much anyone to do. And it seems like such an easy thing that that's even my answer right now. And it's not my only answer, but I would say for me, just propping my legs up and not holding, because everything for me was holding. I'm holding in, stress and grief and everything that I need things to be, and always in a working mode. So for me, it was just mainly restorative postures was the beginning of the journey. And then I started to gravitate into therapeutic yoga in the sense of, and it's like, we could get into a whole story about that, as you know, like what is therapeutic yoga? And isn't yoga all therapeutic? But we know that's not the topic today, so I'll sidestep that. But the idea that I started just making things more about the breath, and I realized that it was not breath-centered for me. I will tell you that I was a reverse breather, and I didn't even know it, like a lot of people. And I know we see that in a lot of our students, but, those moments where I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd have anxiety with where everything was going, and I would feel myself pulling in on the inhale, and I'd think, wow, I know how to breathe. What am I doing? And I thought, oh my gosh, because I'm human. How about that? I get stressed like everybody else. So I realized that I really wasn't focusing on my breathing. I was always focusing on the asana. So I wanted a few things that just let me not work, which we know is restorative, whether it's propping your legs on a chair and I'm going to tell you what, legs at the wall is one of my favorite postures, but when I'm extremely fatigued, I can't even let my legs lay at the wall. I feel restlessness in my legs. So for any of the women that are dealing with endometriosis, sometimes even putting their legs at the wall, and I know the inversion thing we don't do when we're on our cycles, typically, I know I don't, some people do, but I'm not a fan of it. I have seen the effects of inverting even with legs at the wall, honestly, even a gentle inversion like that when I'm on my cycle. So I don't practice that. But legs on the chair allowed me to just calm down and not hold in the body. But my all-time favorite posture actually for females, and I'm sure we've all heard this, is honestly Supta Baddha Konasana, where I just have the bolster under my legs and I'm laying on my back on the floor, nothing even under my spine, because I have lumbar issues, and a lot of females with endometriosis have the lumbar issues where their back aches night and day. Your back and your feet, lower back specifically, and your feet, it feels like you're 90 years old and you've been walking for decades nonstop for no reason. You can wake that way. So for me, it was easing the lower back pain, and it would be either elevating the legs or putting the bolster under my legs. I couldn't even lay flat on my back. And that opening, the hips, the groin, and that space in the belly. I was always taught to, when you're a kid and they say pull your knees to your chest because you have a tummy ache. So I naturally did that when I was cramping. And then I soon learned that wasn't actually helping me. That was pushing and, more into the cramps. And so when I started, one of the things Judith had taught me was lay, in Baddha Konasana. And of course you can support the spine if you'd like to open all that space and get everything moving. But for me, sometimes it was too much for my lower back. So I couldn't even do that. But I started using different props underneath my hips to bring my hips up to shoulder height so that I didn't have the lumbar curvature, because I already have so much of that, and that was taxing my body so much. So I would say those two poses, I could spend so much time in them, and that'd be all I needed to do in one day, just taking some time out to breathe a couple times a day, so that then I could recognize throughout the day when my breath wasn't serving me, because I wasn't, breathing in a way that was fluid and with ease and with my body and within the direction basically of the diaphragm instead of in reverse. Right. So I found those things were the most helpful for me. And that's all I could do for a very long time until I even went back into any active asana. And I just never looked back, honestly. I just started doing a very slow moving, breath-centered practice where it's all intentional and that's what I offer to my students, and is what can you do to give yourself something that you need in the moment? How can you personalize your practice in a class even? Can you look at where you're starting, where your foundation is, how you're feeling, and go from there? And then we choose what movements are feeling right for us in the moment. And when I started doing that for myself, that's the shift I saw in my life. And then I got up one day and thought, okay, this is my yoga life. How can I do this in real life? Because this is working out really well for me.
Explain that then. Really so good. Like your yoga life, And then how did you take that into the rest of your life?
I'm still working on that one. I'll get back to you on that. No. That's my daily practice, and that's what I tell people. That is my daily practice, is how can I, allow myself to feel the way I do in a yoga practice, or when I'm leading people through their practice, that patience that I have, how can I let that spill over into my life and say, this is okay. This is where I'm at today. I brought my hands onto the chair for my forward bend and not to the floor, because that's the forward bend I needed today. So why can't, where I am in my life, why can't that be okay right now? So I've made this joke all the time with my students, like, this is yoga life to me. And the real life out there, I'm still working on that one. Because how do you do that? And I think it's just time. I think it's just being open to letting the change come when you're ready. I think, you'll know when you're ready to do it. And it's not going to happen every day perfectly. And I think that's when I have to, at the end of the day, say, I did pretty good today. Tomorrow might not go as well. So can I not be so hard on myself tomorrow? I have to it's a lot of self-talk, I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of self-talk that I'm learning, these new tools in my life at this point, that you really have to talk yourself through a lot of these situations. And if you don't do that, things can spin out of control really easily. And I can have a really bad day. And one of the things I tell myself honestly is, this is just right now, Kimberly. You are not always going to feel this way. So I prepare. So for those that deal with endometriosis, and one of the things I think to offer to our students that are managing, I like to say managing endometriosis, is that when I start to track how I was feeling, and I started to get a feel for what times of the month I was going to feel a certain way. But then that got to a point where it was too much control. Like I almost knew on my calendar when I was going to feel my back was going to hurt, or my feet were going to hurt, or I was going to deal with this, sorry, too much information, but there's this endo belly that we talk about. Have you heard anybody talk about the endo belly? Okay.
Tell our listeners what that is.
Yeah. So the endo belly is where, just out of nowhere, you could wake up with this, or it could happen midday. It could happen at the end of the day. It could happen all day long with no relief. I had a period where I went through this for a solid year. Every single day I had the endo belly. You look pregnant. That's the best way to explain it. You're bloated, and it's basically coming from inflammation from endometriosis, and it can be coming from the food triggers. Like for me, it's gluten. If I have too much gluten, within a couple of days of having it, if it builds in my system, I will, one, be so fatigued I cannot get out of bed. It's like brain fog. You can't form words. You can't function. You're so tired, you're in tears. And two, you get up and you look like you're about to deliver a baby. And I can go from flat belly to 8 to 9 months pregnant in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes. I have been sitting next to my family, and they witnessed it, and they're like, whoa. And it's horrible. It's embarrassing. I would hide. I would hide behind my clothes. I would hide in my home. I did not want to leave. I didn't want to go to my classes, because I thought, how am I going to get in front of people and look like this? What are people going to think? What if people ask me when I'm going to deliver the baby?
Right.
What if I have to address this? It's so embarrassing, and it's so devastating, and it puts you into a downward spiral. I would just get depressed, and I would just want to hide in that depression again, until I just was like, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. I want to be that energetic person. I want to be positive. I want to like myself again. I want to get up and look in the mirror and think, this is you. I see you again. And it took me a very long time. And I'm going to tell you the truth. It's taken me 7 years, and the 47 pounds slowly came off in such a way that I didn't even know it came off, and I still thought, if that makes sense, until people started telling me that I was looking good and I was looking healthy again. And I thought, oh, and it was honestly, I came off of medicine. I'm not recommending people get off medicines without talking with their doctor, because everybody's situation is different. Mm-hmm. But For me, I was on Cymbalta, to be quite honest. So, of course, for pain and depression, but I was depressed.
Yeah.
It wasn't helping me. And I was on cholesterol medicine. Oh my gosh. I mean, I was so young at the time. I mean, I still am, but at the time, oh my goodness. I was on all these other, I was on birth control. I was on thyroid, T3, T4, all this stuff. And I started to realize these medicines were interacting badly with each other. And of course, I was consulting with a doctor, and I slowly weaned myself off of the medicine. And it's 4 years later, and it took 4 years for all those chemicals to adjust properly in my body. And now this is Kimberly's body off of chemicals. Now, that's not to say that I don't struggle. I still struggle with anxiety and depression on a regular basis because I'm always working on myself, and I'm always trying to, get a handle on how I'm feeling. But, and again, I wouldn't say just come off of medicine for many reasons. And I'm not against being on stuff. I don't think it's wrong to take a medicine for depression or anxiety. I've done it, and I will do it if it's something that I really feel like I need to do. I started eating for my body and practicing yoga for myself and for my body and bringing breath work to the forefront. And honestly, taking things off my plate, because as one of my teachers would say, Robert Bernberg, one of my yoga therapy teachers from LMU, says, no is a complete sentence. So I take things off my plate, even if it's stuff people want me to do or something that I want to do. If I'm tired, I stay home, I put myself first, I rest. If it's a lunch, a class, just some random thing during the week or on the weekend, a work obligation, if I don't feel good, I stay home and I put Kimberly first instead of meeting other people's expectations. So those things have helped me. But to shift back really quick, sorry, I know I just work roundabout ways, but the endo belly is, I will tell you one of the reasons I told the story in this way is I linked the endo belly to stress. I have watched it for years now, and it's not just the food, and I know that's not going to shock any of us yoga teachers out there because we know what stress does to our body. When I am stressed out, something's going on in my life. It could be emotional, it could be financial, it could be physical, whatever it is that's going on in my life. And you know how when you get stressed out, you feel like the short breathing, the chest breathing, or you feel your heart rate, going, or your blood pressure goes up, or some people, they sweat, and we all have these different, very similar, but we all have these different things that happen to us, and we all can connect to those things. I think the shortness of breath, stuff like that, when you're like tensing up or your jaw tenses or you're clenching your fist, things like that. Those same things, when they happen for someone with endometriosis, that stress can cause inflammation like it can for anybody. And depending on what you're dealing with, it could be any other illness that you're dealing with because, inflammation, stress causes inflammation, inflammation causes stress, and those things add to a chronic disease. Well, for me, I would see my belly start to expand because I was allowing myself to get stressed out. And I say allow like it's so easy to just like not be stressed because it's not. I'm like the most high-strung, girl you'll ever meet probably, and I have to work hard at it. But when I let stress really seep in a way that I knew that I could have probably done a little bit of a better job, maybe not till after the fact, I feel it's as impactful as eating gluten or dairy for me. Just like I blow out like that and I feel the belly come out and I can go from like flat or my version of flat, whatever, to, 8 to 9 months looking pregnant, and it could stay with you. And then it causes pelvic pain. It can cause pain just even with your bowel, especially if you have endometriosis on your bowel, which I've had, and it's very common. It's a very common place for it to be. So there's a lot of intestinal issues for women. You get told that you have IBS and just go about your way and, blah, blah, blah. But that's a huge problem too.
I was wondering in that moment if you feel like, okay, the stress is kicking in and endo belly is coming, or I'm feeling discomfort, would it help in that moment to move into restorative yoga, or is it too much?
I think it would. I think every day is different. I will say that. I've had days where I'm like, oh, it's too much. I can't even get to the floor.
Right.
So I have put a bolster in my bed. So I don't have to get up and down, right? Because I think restorative is always good. It's just like breathing. It's always good. I'm always going to promote it. But I don't want to, misinform and say, oh, I just plopped right down on the floor and it was like no big deal. No, it's a struggle. So I've had days where I'm sitting on my couch and I'm like, bed to couch kind of day. So I'm going to either put a bolster on my couch or in my bed, prop my legs or my spine and my legs, and just breathe and see what I can do. And if that's too much, I say, okay, this is not the right thing for me, and be open to the fact that even that yoga posture that I think is like, a wonderful thing to do, maybe it's not today, this moment. But what I do is honestly a little bit of self-talk. And I don't say that lightly because it's not something I could have done 2 years ago, maybe not even a year ago. But I say, okay, this is how you're feeling right now. And you know that this is going to go away. It's going to ease up. So let's focus on breathing. And whether it's just gratitude, like, coming up with some gratitude that's helped me a lot, that we talk about like gratitude journals and stuff like that. I have this tea mug now, and it says, I am grateful for. So every time I go to take a sip, I look at it and it says, I am grateful for. And I try to think of something that, that's good. Like maybe the next day I'm going to be doing something really fun with my family or something. And I want to think of something positive and, trying to think, the opposite of how you're feeling in that moment. But what's helped me is knowing that it's not going to stay like this and that I can feel better. And I have felt better. And if I just remind myself, and a lot of it is preparing emotionally, I'm going to be honest, knowing when it's a day you're not going to feel good, like how can I go about this to take care of myself so that I'm not first of all, so mad that it just messed up my whole day, or I can't do what I need to do right now, or I don't feel the way I want to feel. If I carry that with me, it amplifies how I'm feeling.
Right.
That's the best thing I can say. So I would just say, whatever you can do in the moment that feels right, that's bringing you ease, is what I would offer for somebody to do, whether it's sitting and focusing on the breath, which I think is the forefront, obviously, of our practice. But if you can get into a little restorative posture, even if it means not having to get up and down off the floor, because sometimes I can't even move and get on the floor and get back up. The pelvic pain is sometimes so debilitating that, it's like I'd have to hold onto a wall to get up and down, So I would say just wherever you're comfortable, that you can set yourself up in a way that you can do one thing that brings you a little bit of ease, and try to talk yourself into these moments of this isn't going to last. It's not going to last. It can be better. But I think it's a combination of everything that we do. It's the self-talk. It's the breath work. It's finding the right yoga practice for us and knowing that changes every single day and moment to moment. It's eating for our bodies to properly fuel and nourish the bodies and try to not cause additional stress from a physical and emotional and a perspective from nutrition as well. It's the combination of all of those things, which is a lot of hard work, and trying to keep everything in balance, which ironically is what the yoga practice is like balancing everything, right? And it's like, that's what we really want for all of our students and for ourselves as teachers to spill over into our lives, that balance for ourselves. And we all know that the balance doesn't happen every single day. It's how you can find evenness amidst all of these imbalances. And I think that's the work in yoga. At least it is for me right now.
That's amazing, Kimberly. I want to know then how this kind of informs, like, what is the work that you do now? If someone wanted to work with you, what is it that you offer now as a yoga teacher?
Yeah, so I do weekly classes here in Las Vegas, but I offer private yoga sessions, and I'm able to do them on site. People come to where I teach and practice and work with me, but I also am doing, looking to do the online and Skype and FaceTime, any way that works for people, because I feel like whether you're in state here with me or out of state, sometimes just getting there is a lot of energy for people. And I feel like any way we can meet people where they are. So I'm just happy to chat with people and offer things that I've been through so that people realize they're not alone out there, and that there's a lot of chronic illnesses people are struggling with. And I think we just really need to, to come together as a community and just get some awareness and education out there so that people understand, what's out there. And I have yoga therapy sessions that I offer to people. And I think there's a lot you can do with that to basically look at the whole self and see what's going on in the body, and from a energetic perspective and emotional perspective, as well as a physical perspective.
That's amazing. I can tell just from hearing your honest story, the way you describe things, and this journey that you've had supporting yourself through this, I can hear how supportive you would be, assisting your yoga students as a yoga therapist. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
It's been amazing to talk with you today. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you again for your time and wisdom, Kimberly. It was great to hear what your unique journey has been like and how you continue to use yoga as a tool to learn about, to deal with the challenges that arise both physically and emotionally as you deal with endometriosis. Kimberly's ability to convey what these symptoms are like, I think, is so helpful to us as yoga teachers if we are dealing with similar symptoms, or if we have students who are living with endo, chronic fatigue, and or persistent pelvic pain. Connected yoga teachers, I would love to hear from you. What are your key takeaways from today's episode? I found it fascinating that Kimberly worked with a specialist who then linked endometriosis and mono, and that chronic fatigue came out of all of this. So I talked to a lot of women who have endometriosis, and oftentimes the diagnosis time is really muddled and very long. Someone once told me that it takes approximately 11 years average to be diagnosed with endometriosis. I think the biggest key takeaway for me today in this episode was hearing Kimberly talk about her yoga and her teacher saying to her, "How is it working for you?" And that Judith Hansen-Lassiter asked Kimberly, "Would you be willing to look at exploring something else if I told you that it would allow you to feel better?" So that's interesting because sometimes we're not ready. Also, Kimberly talked about friends and family being there and holding space for her. And I love this idea that we're just there holding space. We have the yoga offerings that we can share with someone, but we can never, what's that saying? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's kind of that thing that we can't see it until we're ready to see it. There were a couple other points that I really loved when Kimberly talked about. One was a real compassion for self when she came to this realization that she couldn't blame herself for this, that she didn't cause it. So that's a message that we can definitely convey to our students who are dealing with something that's autoimmune or persistent pain. Also, this idea of self-care, of saying no. And I would like to leave you with one action step this week. What can you take off your plate this week? What could you say no to? To summarize the poses that Kimberly uses for her own body, and just knowing that each body is unique. She really talked about legs on a chair being a pose that she often will turn towards. Also breath, going with natural breath, and reclined butterfly, and done in a really restorative and supportive way. If you are living with endometriosis, or if you work with yoga students who do, I would love to hear from you in the comments of our show notes page. So go to theconnectedyogateacher.com/79 and leave your comments there or your questions. I always check in with those. If you want to get together in person, I am teaching a 20-hour yoga teacher training all focused on yoga for pelvic health. It happens September 22nd and 23rd, 2018 in Meaford, Ontario. If you cannot make it to the in-person training, there's an 8-hour online training. So check that out. Go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look for our trainings button at the top. I still have spaces to work one-on-one, and because we're wrapping up summer here in North America, that means I'm back to a regular routine very soon here in September. So if you want to work one-on-one with me in a consultation call, visit theconnectedyogateacher.com and look for the Work with Shannon at the top. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor, press pause now and leave us a review on iTunes. If you're not sure how to do that, you can do it right from our show notes page, theconnectedyogateacher.com/79. Look for the button at the top that says leave a review. Josie B. Yogi from the United States, thank you for your review. Josie B. Yogi says, absolutely love this podcast. I'm addicted to Shannon's podcast. There's just so much valuable information for yoga teachers here. I also appreciate the sense of connection the podcast and Facebook group provides. I completed my teacher training last month, and listening to the advice and knowledge shared by a variety of professionals has helped me feel less overwhelmed as I begin my journey to share my passion for yoga. Thanks, Shannon, for taking the time and thoughtfulness to bring this gem to us every week. Well, thank you, Josie B. Yogi. It is so nice to hear that the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast has decreased that overwhelm. So we're doing our job here if that was the case for you. Alrighty, Connected Yoga Teachers, I will see you back here next week for part 2 of this endometriosis series. Huge shout out of thanks to our amazing team, Laura, Samantha, and Suzanne, and to you, our listeners. I want to welcome my cousin John to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast today. He's 11 years old and has been visiting us this week. I was telling him about the podcast and he wanted to say hi. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, John. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Shannon. Have a great week, yoga teachers. Stay connected.